Today I want to show you this old painting I did, and here's a very extreme close-up of it, and I'm going to paint over the top of this. You can see it's fairly well painted, but the values and colors just not quite right. So the first thing I want to do is mix up a medium into which I'm going to paint into. In other words, I'm going to put this mixture onto my canvas and then paint into that. So I use my usual medium, which is G-Gel, which is made by Gamblin. And I add some burnt plate oil number 8, which is quite thick. As you can see, it's almost like taffy. So it's a little bit hard to mix in, so you have to be very patient and just use a palette knife and just mix it until it's ready to rub on. So I take a thick bristle brush and I just start applying it onto my canvas. Now I want this to be a thick medium so that when I paint into this medium, it will seem like I'm painting wet into wet. I don't want to have a feeling that I'm painting onto a dry canvas. Now it's a little bit too thick on the sky. My pigment was just a little bit too, you know, intense. So I'm just going to wipe that down a little bit with a rag. Today I wanted to review a concept that I've talked about in previous blogs and videos, and it's one that some people have had a little bit of trouble with. I've gotten some emails asking me why I use a full value, full color underpainting. Usually they ask, why don't I just use a monochromatic underpainting? And the reason is, for me, when I use a monochromatic underpainting such as raw umber or burnt sienna, it simply doesn't work. I have trouble matching the value to color. For example, if I had burnt sienna underpainting and it was the very darkest part and I was mixing up a blue, I just have a lot of trouble matching that blue to that warm, dark value. So for me, I just decided that I would do quite a bit of underpainting, quite a bit of work, and just, you might say, I just want to do my homework. And so when I come back in with a color, I just want to be able to match it. Lately, I've been oiling up my canvas with a mixture of G-Gel and plate oil and adding some pigment. In this case, I added purple into it. And it's a very nice way to get some pigments that will sort of add to the color you're laying the other colors into, and it sort of adds the purple tint to all your colors. So as I paint this blue and white and purple into this underpainting, or this couche as I sometimes call it, um, it will impart a slight purpley tint to all my colors. So I'm just very carefully matching values, and in this case I don't have to use my value finder because when I lay the color on I instantly know how far the value is off. Now I might want to shift some of the values, and as you can see I've put some warm color underneath. I'm using my reduction lens to see where I need to make some changes. Now I've mixed up the paint for the ground, and I'm shifting it to quite a bit lighter in value. And this is because the ground plane will always be lighter, and I just made the ground plane a little bit too close to the upright planes in this case. So I wanted to fix that in this overpainting. As you can see, as I put in a lighter value for the ground plane, it just starts to work quite a bit better. And if you can remember to keep your values coherent with the concept of value zones, which I've explained in other videos, it just sort of makes everything a little bit more logical, a little bit more easier to understand. Now here I'm starting to put in some highlights into the darker shadowy areas. In my underpainting, I made my shadow area way too dark, so I want to lighten up this basic area as I go along here. So I'm starting to put some highlights into the light area. I used my basic palette that I always use, except in this case I added some colors from Gamblin called Transparent Earth colors. And I used transparent earth red, orange, and yellow. And they're just very nice colors. The transparent earth yellow is very, very dark. It looks like almost a brown out of the tube, but if you add white to it, it warms right up to a very nice yellow. But you can add the dark version to purple, and it makes a beautiful shadow color in this kind of a scene. The purple and the yellow obviously being complementary, but of very deep values, so they maintain the shadowiness of the pigment. Now as I go along here, I'm trying to break up some of the edges a little bit. The edge along the top of the rock was a little bit too angular and a little bit too straight, so I'll go back in and add some more variety to that. I put a little bit of blue in my highlight color just to see if that was going to work as far as picking up some reflected light, and it wasn't really working all that well, so I actually kind of went back and obliterated over the top of that. Just adding some more lighter color into the shadows. You can see the shadow area is considerably lighter now, which is good. One thing that I've always had a problem with because of my background in woodcut is making shadows just too dark. I just think of shadows as kind of black, and it's just from doing it for so many years. In the woodcut medium, it works pretty good. In painting, it works less so because you lose your detail, and you just lose your light and your shadows. I decided that my shadows were a little bit too dark and a little bit too cool, so I'm going to add some more warms back in. So in red rock, you'll get a lot of reflected light, so you don't want to just make it completely cool. You've got to warm that up here and there. There'll be a lot of light reflecting off of rocks, and it'll push back a lot of red light back into those shadows. Again, I'm just sort of making my darks a little bit less dark, putting a little bit more reflected light. I'm using quite a bit of cadmium red light, which I mix with my other transparent earth colors. I like the cadmium red because it's a little bit grayer than some of the other reds like Napsol red or Quin red, which are too high chroma. They don't gray out well enough. Trying to get rid of some of my detail here as I go along. Just trying to simplify a few shapes. Especially towards the edge, you don't want a lot of detail. My sagebrush tend to be like little blobs of dark pigments, so I'm going back in and trying to break up some of those shapes, add a little bit more variety to them, and additionally put in some highlights. I find that I can inadvertently create a line of sagebrush, so I have to be careful not to create arbitrary compositional elements as I lay in some of my sagebrush. There's a line right in the middle of the ground plane there that I think I will go back and break up at some point, but now as light hits a surface, the color will shift down. So if warm light is hitting a red rock, the light bouncing off will shift considerably down, so down the spectrum, so it'll shift to like an orangey light, and if it bounces again, it'll shift over to a red light. So there's quite a bit of complexity going on in the shadows, and you want to be very conscious of how that looks. Here's the finished piece.